The Young and the Restless Spoilers shock. Victoria had always lived with shadows clinging to her life, but lately those shadows had begun to take the shape of her daughter, Claire. For months she had carried a gnawing suspicion that Claire was hiding something too dangerous to ignore, something that went far beyond the usual rebellion or secrecy of youth. There were late-night disappearances, whispered phone calls, cryptic excuses that dissolved under scrutiny. Cole, the one man who might have provided clarity, was gone now, leaving nothing behind but silence. His death had been mysterious, abrupt, the kind that sent questions echoing louder than grief. No confession, no explanation, no words of comfort to Victoria in his final moments, only the hollow certainty that whatever truth he had carried with him had died alongside him. Yet Victoria could not shake the feeling that Cole's silence was not the end, but the beginning of something darker. Anger and confusion churned within her, and in that turbulent storm she had turned her attention entirely to Claire, determined to peel away the layers of deceit her daughter had woven. It began as quiet surveillance. Victoria would track Claire's movements discreetly, noting her patterns, the times she vanished without notice, the places she lingered that bore no reason for her presence. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct, sharpened by years of living in a family where betrayal and secrets were as common as the air they breathed. Then Holden entered the picture. At first he seemed like a bystander, someone who crossed paths with Claire by chance, but soon his presence grew too consistent, too carefully hidden from the light. Victoria noticed the way Claire's demeanor shifted around him, furtive glances, hurried steps, a sense of urgency that wasn't there before. Holden was more than an acquaintance, and whatever tied him to her daughter was heavy with secrecy. Victoria's suspicion hardened into certainty when, one evening, she witnessed Holden ushering Claire into his car. The movements were hurried, deliberate, as though they feared being seen. But Victoria was there, engine humming softly as she trailed them through winding streets, her heart pounding with every turn. The pursuit led her farther from familiar ground, away from the comfort of Genoa City's polished facades, until the landscape gave way to something more isolated, almost desolate. At last, Holden pulled into the driveway of a strange, unfamiliar house. It stood like a relic, isolated and weathered, its presence unsettling even at a distance. Victoria parked far enough away to remain unseen, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on every movement. She watched as Holden and Claire stepped out, carrying with them a large bag that sagged with weight. It wasn't casual, this wasn't shopping, this wasn't routine. There was intent in the way Holden gripped the handles, and Claire's nervous glances toward the house spoke volumes. Victoria slipped from her car, moving silently across the uneven ground, careful not to break a twig or disturb the quiet that pressed down around her. What she discovered when she drew closer froze her blood. The house was not the true destination, beneath it, there was more. A hidden structure, a cellar, a place dug into the earth that seemed to swallow sound and light alike. Victoria's sharp ears picked up something that made her heart lurch, muffled cries. Faint but unmistakable, a voice straining against captivity. It rose and fell in desperation, echoing through the silence like a ghost begging to be released. Victoria pressed closer, her body tense, every sense heightened. From her vantage point, she saw Holden and Claire move toward the cellar door. They carried the bag of food with them, descending into the darkness below. For a moment, the cries grew louder as the door creaked open, and the truth struck her like a physical blow. Someone was down there. Someone was alive. And Claire, her daughter, the girl she had fought so hard to protect, was complicit in keeping them locked away. Victoria's mind reeled, torn between denial and horror. She had suspected secrets, yes, but not this. Not her own flesh and blood tied to something so monstrous. She pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle the sound of her own breathing, forcing herself to stay hidden as her thoughts raced. Who was it? Who could possibly be trapped down there, unseen, unheard, except for the occasional desperate cry? Was it someone connected to Cole's death, someone who had known too much? Was Claire merely an accomplice, manipulated by Holden, or was she the architect of this nightmare herself? The questions spun in her head, each one heavier than the last, but the image of her daughter carrying food to a prisoner was undeniable proof that Claire was tangled in something horrifying. As the minutes dragged, Victoria's anger began to eclipse her fear. Rage pulsed through her veins as she realized how deeply Claire had deceived her, how Cole's death now seemed even more suspicious, possibly tied to this dark secret that Holden and Claire were guarding. The thought that her daughter could be capable of such cruelty twisted inside her, threatening to break her. She wanted to storm the cellar, to rip the door open and confront them, to see with her own eyes who lay inside that pit of darkness. Yet instinct held her back. Recklessness would serve no purpose. She needed clarity, she needed evidence, she needed to know the truth before she made her move. And so, she stayed rooted in the shadows, trembling with fury and disbelief, watching as Holden and Claire disappeared below ground, the cries echoing in her ears like the tolling of a bell that marked the end of innocence. Victoria had uncovered something terrible, but this was only the beginning. She knew now that the threads of mystery surrounding Cole's death, Holden's presence, and Claire's behavior were all woven into a single, sinister tapestry. The hidden cellar, the prisoner's desperate voice, the clandestine delivery of food, these were not isolated events. They were pieces of a larger game, one that Victoria had no choice but to enter. Her daughter's soul was on the line, and perhaps more than that, the truth about what had really happened to Cole, about why he had died without a word, could very well lie beneath that house, in the darkness where someone still begged for freedom. Victoria's determination crystallized in that moment. She would not turn away. She would not let fear dictate her next step. Whatever horror awaited in the depths of that cellar, she would uncover it, even if it meant tearing apart the fragile bond between herself and her daughter. Because the truth, no matter how devastating, could no longer remain buried. Victoria's world tilted on its axis the moment she pressed her eye against the crack of the cellar door and saw what lay within. Her chest tightened, her pulse quickened, and for a moment she thought her mind was betraying her, spinning illusions born of fear and grief. But no, her eyes did not deceive her. The figure bound to a bed, hands tied, chest heaving with shallow breaths, was Cole. The man she had mourned, the man whose mysterious death had haunted her every thought, was not gone at all. He was alive, but battered, imprisoned, left in the shadows of a place so far removed from everything she thought she knew. It was nice, the same city Kane had so recently drawn people toward with his calculated invitations, the same place that was supposed to represent power and prestige. But beneath the surface, hidden under a seemingly ordinary house, was the cruel reality. Cole had been reduced to a captive, a pawn in a plot Victoria could scarcely comprehend. The shock was so great that for a moment Victoria could not breathe. Questions swirled violently in her head. Why here, of all places? Why Nice, a city drenched in wealth and secrecy, a place where shadows could easily swallow lives without anyone noticing? And more than that, why Cole? What did he know that was so dangerous, so incriminating, that Claire and her allies had felt compelled to silence him by force? He had carried his secrets to the edge of death before, saying nothing in his supposed final moments, and now the truth revealed itself with devastating clarity. He had been silenced not by fate, but by Claire herself. Victoria's daughter, flesh of her flesh, had orchestrated a prison for the man who had once been so integral to their family's story. Her body trembled with rage and disbelief as she watched Claire step closer to the bed, Holden at her side, placing the heavy bag of food on a nearby table. The air in the cellar was thick, suffocating, and Cole's eyes flickered open in recognition of his captors. He tried to speak, his voice hoarse, but the gag and the restraints reduced his words to muffled cries of desperation. Even so, the intent was clear. He wanted to expose her. He wanted to denounce Claire, to tell the world of the crimes she had committed, but instead he had been left to rot in chains. Victoria could see it in his gaze, an unbroken determination beneath the exhaustion, a plea for freedom, a demand for justice. It was almost unbearable to witness, yet she could not look away. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows outside, fighting the urge to burst through the door and tear Claire away from him. But reason whispered in her ear. She had come too far to be reckless. If they saw her now, all would be lost. She had to remain unseen, to absorb every detail, to understand the full scope of what was happening before making her move. Because this was no ordinary scheme. It was intricate, layered, brimming with the fingerprints of multiple players. Claire was not acting alone, Victoria could feel it in her bones. This was a conspiracy, one with allies scattered in places she had not yet dared to look. Her thoughts darted back to Kane, to his carefully staged invitations that had brought powerful figures into Nice under the guise of celebration. Why would Kane draw so many eyes here, unless it was a distraction, a smokescreen to conceal the darker machinations brewing beneath the surface? Was Kane part of Claire's inner circle, or merely a pawn himself, manipulated into helping her tighten her web? And what of Holden? His loyalty was clear, but was he the architect or simply the enforcer? The weight of these questions pressed heavily on Victoria's chest, each one cutting deeper than the last. Still, the most devastating blow was the realization that Claire, her own daughter, had chosen this path. Claire's composure, her cold efficiency as she tended to Cole's captivity, revealed not hesitation but commitment. She had embraced this darkness willingly, and Victoria knew there was no turning back for her. Whatever motives lay beneath, revenge, fear, ambition, they had transformed Claire into something unrecognizable. She was no longer the daughter Victoria thought she had known, she was something else entirely, a force operating in shadows, with a network of allies whose intentions were as dangerous as they were hidden. Victoria's nails dug into her palms as she crouched lower, her breath shallow and uneven. She needed a plan. She could not allow this horror to continue, could not abandon Cole to this subterranean prison where his cries would never reach the surface. He had suffered enough already, silenced by those who feared the truths he carried. And yet, to rush in now would be suicide, not only for her, but for him as well. If they discovered her, they would tighten their grip, move Cole to an even darker place where rescue would become impossible. No, she had to bide her time, to strike when the odds shifted in her favor. The sight of Cole's suffering carved itself into her memory, fueling the fire that burned in her veins. She had never felt such urgency, such desperate determination, not even in her battles against Victor or the endless corporate wars that defined her past. This was different. This was personal. She had been deceived into mourning a man who was still alive, deceived into believing her daughter was merely troubled rather than monstrous. And now, armed with the truth, she would stop at nothing to set things right. She would save Cole, expose Claire, and unravel every alliance that had conspired to bury this nightmare in silence. As Holden and Claire retreated deeper into the cellar, arranging the food and exchanging whispers that Victoria could not fully catch, she began to move back. Step by careful step, she withdrew from the window, from the narrow vantage point that had opened the door to this ghastly revelation. Her heart thundered in her ears, yet she forced herself to remain quiet, invisible, unseen. One slip, one wrong sound, and she would be discovered, dragged into the very darkness she sought to expose. When at last she reached the safety of the tree line, she allowed herself a single shaky breath, her body nearly collapsing from the strain of silence. But even as she retreated, her resolve only deepened. She would return. She would not leave Cole to rot beneath that house in Nice. She would find a way to break him free, no matter the cost. And when she did, the truth he carried, the truth Claire had tried so desperately to silence, would come crashing into the light. The horror of the moment would never leave her, the image of Cole tied to the bed, eyes burning with desperation, struggling to denounce the very daughter she had brought into the world. It was a vision carved into her soul, a reminder that love and blood were no shield against betrayal. Claire had crossed a line that could never be undone, and in doing so, she had set into motion a reckoning that even her allies would not escape. Victoria fled into the night, her body trembling but her mind razor-sharp. The game had changed. What began as suspicion had grown into revelation, and now into mission. The fight ahead would be long, brutal, and perilous, but there was no alternative. She would tear apart every secret, dismantle every alliance, and burn down every wall that stood between her and the truth. And when the dust settled, Claire would face the full weight of the horrors she had unleashed.